between private and public interests. To discuss this issue, we've gathered quite a panel today, so let me first briefly introduce you to our speakers today. For more detailed titles on the screen. Professor Franco Cavalli, renowned oncologist, former member of the Swiss Parliament. Mr. Cavalli will talk about the problem of access to medicines, essential treatments, from his long professional experience. Dr. Ellen Toon, public health advocate, renowned expert, and a lawyer from the Netherlands. She will explain how the pharma business model works with regard to patents and introduce the main instrument at hand for government to protect public health. Dr. Francisco Rossi, director of ePharma. His organization initiated the petition in Colombia for a declaration of public interest on Novartis cancer treatment. He will therefore provide a first-hand testimony of the pressures that the government faces when trying to go down this route and discuss the problematic role played by the authorities in that saga. My colleague, Patrick Durich, he will present the landmark campaign that Publica is launching today for affordable drugs. And last but not least, former president of the Swiss Confederation, Ruth Dreyfus, who has honored us today with her presence. She also co-chaired the UN high-level panel on access to medicines. Conference should last about 45 minutes. We will then have time for your questions and remarks on this very important topic that concerns each and every one of us, not only as professionals, but also as citizens and as potential patients. Thank you for your attention. Enjoy the conference. Mr. Cavalli.
Well, good afternoon to everybody. I will briefly discuss, as the first speaker, the role of drugs in cancer treatment without slides, but trying to be as simple as possible. Well, using drugs in the cancer treatment is what we call systemic treatment, which is in contrast to the so-called local treatments, which are surgery and radiotherapy. And systemic treatment is becoming more and more important in the treatment of cancer, although it's the youngest one since it has started roughly after World War II. But before doing that, I just want to remind you, we should not forget that prevention and early diagnosis are even more important. If in the last 10 years, the overall mortality because of cancer in the rich countries has slightly decreased, is more because of prevention and early diagnosis than because of treatment. Now, cancer is already now the health problem #1 in the rich countries, and it will soon become also the health problem #1 in the developing countries. And this is not widely appreciated. There is a very rapid transformation in the developing country from infectious diseases to non-transmissible diseases, mainly to cancer. If in 1970, only 70% of the global burden of cancer was in the developing world, it has been calculated that by 2030, 70% of the death because of cancer, and that means somewhere between 14 and 15 million deaths, will be in the low and middle income countries. Now, the main problem there are that nothing is really prepared for that. There is a lack of prevention, a lack of early diagnosis, of pathologists, of surgeons, of radiotherapy. There are more than 30 countries in the world which do not have one single radiotherapeutic equipment. But if we come to drugs, the problem is not so much that of human resources, but is more the problem of cost. 95% of the consumption of anti-cancer drugs is in the rich countries, and the rest of the world consumes about 5%. The problem is cost. Just to simplify it, 25 years ago, here in Switzerland, a monthly treatment systemic treatment for cancer costed somewhere between 500 and 750 francs. Today, it is about 22,000. That means that it has increased by 40, 50 times. The drugs which come now to the market cost at least $100,000 per patient per year, and sometimes 120, 130, 150. So, and you have to calculate that very often oncologists do not use one drug alone, but combine drugs. So by combining drugs, you are at a yearly cost of $250,000, $300,000 per patient. Another consequences of this situation is not only that this is no longer payable for our countries, is that there is a shortage of old drugs, which are still very good, but very cheap, so that there is an artificial decrease in the production of the old drugs in order to oblige us to use the new ones, which are much more expensive. Or if the old drug is still available, generally it is produced just by one company, which has increased the cost of the old drug with no expenses at all, sometimes by 500, 1,000%. We remember the guy in New York, which is now in jail, who increased that by 5,000%. So these are all consequences of this situation, which is no longer sustainable even for rich countries. What do we have now in Switzerland? The situation is that when a new drug arrives, it is accepted by the Swiss medic, and then it's the second step. It must go to the federal office of social expenses, which will then decide whether the drug will be paid by the basic insurance. People who have a complementary insurance, and these are 20–22% of the population, also the 20–22% richer in Switzerland, they might get the drug immediately. And now, because of the cost, the federal office is delaying as much as possible the moment when the normal patient will get the drug because of the basic insurance. It might take 2, it might take 3 years, and it will introduce always more limitations. That means this drug can be used only as a second or a third line treatment, like it has been the case for the hepatitis drug. That means we can use that only in situations which are no longer favorable for the patient. So a delay and a limitation excluding the most favorable situation, which would be for us if we could use that from the very beginning. I am a member of the WHO committee which has to put together the list of the essential medicines. And in the last years, we have included in this list 3 or 4 drugs which do not cost 100,000 per year, but which cost 30 to 35, 40,000 francs per year, and which are very important because they can increase the cure rate of the patient. So these are not palliative drugs, are curative drugs. But the vast majority of the people in the world, including East Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, and those countries, have no access to that because patients have to pay out of the pocket to get those drugs. So if the situation is very difficult already here, it is absolutely impossible for 100,000 or even million of patients in the less rich countries. Another problem, which is well described in the documentation that you have received, is that this monopolistic situation is not increasing, as it is often said, the innovation, is decreasing innovation, because you have a monopoly for 20 years, you don't have to do anything, and then you can just modify a little bit the drug, and leading to the so-called Me Too drugs, which means just a little bit improved, perhaps, but not really innovative. And that has led to the fact that lately 2 very big studies in the US and in Europe have demonstrated that 60% of the drugs cancer drugs which have been accepted to the market in the last 15 years are of no or of very limited value. Their mean gain in survival is 2 months, but you have among them 3 or 4 which are very good, but the others, and we talk about 50 drugs, have almost no advantage in comparison to the old ones, but are accepted just because of the potency of the pharma lobby. To conclude, what can we do? We will discuss a lot about compulsory licensing, but there are different models. I just briefly summarize one which has been put forward by the Nobel Prize in Economy, Dr. Stiglitz, who has been saying for many years now that the situation is economically unsustainable. And he's saying we have to change the system to abandon or lower the importance of patents, that we have to find another way to compensate the industries which really produce innovation, and that we have to have, again, the states involved in the development of new drugs, which they have abandoned 25 years ago, and today everything is in the hands of the pharmaceutical company, the clinical studies. Clinical studies should be, again, financed mainly by the public hand, so to supervise the outcome and to avoid what we have today, that the clinical trials are carried out in an extremely selected population, which do not represent the bulk of the patients that we are confronted with daily, so that based on this very selected population and on preliminary data, you get to the market, and later on, post-marketing studies, as I have been saying, will then demonstrate that these drugs are much less efficacious than it was claimed at the beginning. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Ellen het Hoen. I would like to start by thanking Public Eye to, you believe it, right? Okay. For inviting me to speak at this very moment, this very important moment in time. It is also an honor for me to be in the presence of Madame Dreyfus, who has done so much very, very important work to advance this agenda. Now, I'm going to give to you the briefest introduction you've ever had to patents and compulsory licensing. I've been told I have 8 minutes. I studied this for years, and I think I finally begin to get it. So bear with me. Right, I'll dive right into it. Let's start with the function of patents, which is, as Professor Cavalli already explained, sort of the cornerstone of our innovation system. By encouraging inventors to make investments in time and money to develop new products that we hopefully need, by providing them with exclusive rights to their innovation. That means that they can exclude others from using their invention. It is a common misunderstanding that a patent is a property right. It is not a property like you can own your house or your bicycle or a bottle of water. It is a negative right. You have the right to exclude others. In the field of pharmaceuticals, I should add, there are several other exclusivities. It's not just patents. There's actually a whole array of exclusive rights out there, and some are even more sort of forceful than patents, but let's stick to this. It is therefore a social policy tool. It is meant to create benefits to society as a whole, not just to the holders of these patents. That is the framework, but it comes at a cost for society. Now, if that cost to society is not acceptable, not bearable, then the state, the government, can intervene, actually needs to intervene. And I'll come back to that later. They have tools to do that. Professor Cavalli already mentioned compulsory licensing. There are variants of that. For example, government use of patents, which is the government basically giving a compulsory license to itself. And why do we have these exclusive periods? It's particularly important for pharmaceuticals because many of the pharmaceuticals that we're talking about, including some of those cancer medicines that have been put on the WHO essential medicines list, are very, very cheap to make. So if you do not give the manufacturer or the inventor, I should say, which is often not the same, different subject, not the opportunity to exploit the invention by giving an exclusive right, generic competition will very quickly drive the price down, and the concern of that is that the stimulus to continue to invest in the development of these products will disappear. That is the thinking behind this. But if the cost to society is too high, what can happen? Well, governments can intervene. Governments can issue a compulsory license, which means give another the right to use that invention. That could, for example, be generic companies. That right could also lead to the importation of lower cost generic medicines from elsewhere. What a compulsory license or a government use license does is it lifts the monopoly effect of a patent. The patent stays in place. The patent holder, if that's the company, keeps the patent, and the patent holder is entitled to a reasonable remuneration when someone else makes use of that patent. It is part of patent law. You can actually not have a sensible patent law if you do not also have robust provisions for compulsory licensing and government use. It is part of the balancing act of the social contract. But of course, that balancing act only works if governments indeed make use of these provisions when needed. I mean, that has to be said. You can find it in almost all patent law. You can certainly find it in the TRIPS agreement, Article 31. There is a special compulsory license for export, 31 bis. That is the only ever amendment to a piece of WTO legislation for public health reasons. And of course, the Doha Declaration on TRIPS and Public Health, which clarifies these options further. And I would like to argue that the human right to health actually puts a duty on states to make use of these provisions. If not making use of these provisions means that people do not have access to proven, effective, life-saving medicines. That's the statement I would like to make here. Now, we have a lot of lessons to learn from what happened with HIV/AIDS. You often hear people say compulsory licensing, we talk about it's never been used. That's actually not true. Particularly after the adoption of the Doha Declaration on TRIPS and Public Health, the use of the TRIPS flexibilities, of which compulsory licensing is only one, increased dramatically. Countries made, on a very large scale, use of these provisions, particularly the government use, to enable the importation and the supply of generic antiretroviral medicines. In this period, this is shortly after the Global Fund was established, and people were seeking ways to use that money wisely and buy wisely. That meant pre-qualified, WHO pre-qualified antiretrovirals. These mechanisms were used very widely. You then see a period after that, licensing, voluntary licensing, became more of the norm, because that is often the response by patent holders. Say, well, they don't like the compulsory, but you can persuade them to then license in another manner. You see another pickup here of increased number of compulsory licenses. These are almost all compulsory licenses, most of them for non-communicable diseases, and most of those for cancer medication. Now, how that trend will further develop, we will continue to study, but there are important lessons to be learned, and I think the full article on this slide is available to you. So these are the countries that have used TRIPS flexibility in the procurement of generic medicines. But what is interesting today is that the discussion about the use of compulsory licensing is really gaining steam in Europe. Here are just some examples of what is happening today. In France, cancer researchers have requested publicly that the government uses government use powers for cancer drug. In Germany, a court ordered, this was in a patent dispute, a compulsory license for an HIV medicine, referring to the public health needs to do so. Greece, high cost of medication has led to calls and the withdrawal of cancer medicines by companies has led to calls for the use of compulsory licensing. In Ireland, the Irish Medical Association has adopted a resolution calling on the government to issue a government use license for hepatitis C medication. In Italy, the competition authorities are very active and use compulsory licensing to combat anti-competitive behavior. Romania has contemplated the use of compulsory licensing for hepatitis C medication. Scotland recently requests by cancer patients who do not have access to particular breast cancer drug have petitioned the government to issue a crown use. In the UK, a government use is called crown use because they have the crown. Spain, same thing. In the Netherlands, our Minister of Health has publicly declared to seriously investigate the use of compulsory licensing to deal with high drug prices. And again, often this is done in reference to the high cost of cancer medication. And in the UK, cancer patients have requested the same. All to say, this issue has now become a global issue. We can learn a lot from what we have done with HIV and what countries have done to increase access to antiretroviral medicines, but we're dealing with a global crisis. I want to just run quickly through a few common misunderstandings, if I may, Madam Chair. How many seconds do I have for that? This was a 12-week course, okay, in my law school. All right, the compulsory licensing never been used. I think I've dealt with that. If you don't believe me, the paper is in the back. Another one is, it's only for emergencies and cancer is not an emergency. First of all, one may argue that cancer is becoming an emergency, but let's set that aside. This is simply not true. If you use compulsory licensing in an emergency situation, it's a little quicker because you don't have to first try to get a voluntary license. So it's a little faster. That's the only difference. You do not need an emergency to intervene. It's only for infectious diseases. Not true. You can use it for whatever reason you want, whatever disease or product you want. It's only for use by low-income countries. That is also not true. I already explained. You find it in all patent law. One that we hear recently more and more, and I wonder where it's coming from, is compulsory licensing is theft. Well, it's not. I think I explained that in the introduction why that is not. Compulsory licensing will halt innovation. Now, that's not a 12-week course, but certainly a one-hour additional conference to address that one. There's no evidence that it does. I do think that we need to have a conversation about whether our current innovation system, based on exclusivity as the primary way of incentivizing it, is the best possible system, whether it is the most efficient way of doing that. And that is a conversation. I was listening this morning to the World Health Assembly that a number of member states are putting on the table here. And that is really the most important discussion to have. Now, another misunderstanding is compulsory license will solve all your problems. It does not. It has a very precise role. And that role is limited to situations where the problem is indeed caused by a patent. A patent in itself is not problematic if the price is reasonable and the community and the patients can afford it. And a compulsory license is also not necessary when the company or the patent holder is willing to license the innovation. So we have to put these things in that perspective. I want to leave you with this thought by the late Sir John Sulston, a great scientist and a great thinker, who once said at a conference, that was organized by Médecins Sans Frontières, the Access to Essential Medicines campaign, where at the time I was working and where I learned a lot about these issues. He said intellectual property in the form of patents should be thought of as a very useful tool with a relatively narrow applicability, rather than as a means for owning ever larger swaths of human knowledge, which is the way it is being driven at the moment. I thank you for your attention, and on our website you can find a lot more background information than I could share with you today, but I hope I succeeded in giving you a crash course in compulsory licensing. I thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the organizers, and good afternoon, all of you. I will take my opportunity, and this special opportunity, to share with you the situation we faced in Colombia when asked for a compulsory license for Glivec, a Novartis cancer drug you maybe have heard. I need to explain very briefly that why we asked for this compulsory license. The patent of Glivec, imatinib in Colombia, was the first one in a very interesting series of irregular patents. Novartis asked for a patent in 1998, and the request was rejected by the patent office because it was the secondary patent without a primary patent in Colombia. It is a very technical, very interesting discussion, but it's important that you take into account it was not a usual, normal patent. And after this rejection by the patent office, what happened was that Novartis went to the court and obtained, 12 years after, a patent ordered by judiciary, which was the first one in Colombia, and opened the door for a lot of requests because it was the Black Friday for the pharmaceutical industry to obtain the patents for rejected patents by the patent office. And we are right now with a lot of these kind of requests to the judiciary because of this precedent of Novartis. Bad news for us. In the market, when this patent arrived, 12 years after the first request, there were more than 8 generic versions of imatinib successfully used in the market of Colombia in medicine. And because of the patent, all of them were removed, and Novartis obtained the whole market, and it was a very complex impact in the finances of the health system and in health, in the management of patients. So we decided as a group of NGOs to ask for a compulsory license. The organization were IFARMA, which is Health Action International in Colombia, as you can see in Spanish in the corner, the Center of Information on Medicines of the National University, CIMUN in Spanish, Centro de Información de Medicamentos de la Universidad Nacional, and Mission on Health, Misión Salud. 3 organizations that went to ask it for this compulsory license. And, okay, I'm here as a plan B, because the intention of the organizers was to have here the Minister of Health of Colombia, which I must mention that it was very brave confronting the pressure that this request, which they just began to analyze, moved from the United States, from the Swiss government, from the laboratories, from the pharma, everywhere. And he's not here because it was not possible at this moment. Next week we have elections, and all politicians are at home for obvious reasons. But, okay, I just have 10 minutes, less than 10 minutes. But if he was here, for sure, not have enough time to share with you the kind of pressures and the kind of situations he must face. Just to mention the most aggressive ones, it was from the government of the United States, which offered some support for the peace process and said, okay, we are going to support you only in the case that the imatinib patent is not breaked by a compulsory license. So forget this discussion. And in the same way, and in the same situation by the Swiss government. And of course, most of you, all of you, are aware about the letter that the CEO from Novartis wrote to the President of the Republic, saying that your Minister of Health is amazing, is wrong, and is moving against the innovation and every argument you have heard in the past. I was thinking for a long time that this is a kind of problem, this is a kind of north-south confronting. It's some kind of empire and colony discussion. Because if you think about the tool to extract richness from the colony to the empire is monopolies. It's an historical fact, an economical fact, and think about patents are monopolies. It's interesting. We, in some discussions about patents for medicines, mentioned that there are some connections between slavery and patents for medicines. Interesting. But at this moment, I am almost sure that it's not a problem about North-South. It's about the problem of the people with privileges. Because privileged people are very brave and are very subtle and are very, you can choose a lot of adjectives. But at the end, which you can see in every one of these discussions, is that privileged people obtain the support of governments to act defending their privileges and moving against the citizen. I was wondering why the Swiss government, and it's a question for you, why the Swiss government, instead to discuss with the pharmaceutical industry the price of drugs, prefer to move to restrict, to put conditions on access to medicines for patients, for citizens. So it's a decision in favor of privileges and against the citizens. And there are a lot of cases. I just remember the case of a civil servant in the United States. Her son died because it's not possible to afford diabetes drugs in the United States right now. So governments are working more in this side. Just to finish, we moved a lot against these pressures. Remember that any compulsory license in developing countries was for free, was the result of a lot of brave of the governments and a lot of efforts from civil society organizations. And we asked WHO, WIPO, and the WTO, because these kind of pressures are out of the rules. And we said to them, in a letter you can find in a lot of places, we have that in our webpage, I can send any one of you interested. And we said to these organizations, okay, you are the defenders of the global system on health and on intellectual property. And if you don't do something to equilibrate the system, to defend the system is going to crash. And we are waiting, we sent this letter in February, and we are waiting for an answer until now. I just want to finish mentioning that I'm not sure we can rely on governments. I'm sure civil society organizations play a major role in this discussion, and we are working on that, and we will do that for the future. And I think the other power that can balance, that can make a contribution to this balance is the media. And I'm very happy because I'm here by an invitation of a civil society organization in a press conference room. So I think I am in the correct place at the current time. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. It's my pleasure to present the campaign that we are launching today. We're disclosing for the first time in public the visual of the campaign. I don't know if you can read it, but it just says, I need 100,000 francs, Swiss francs for a cancer treatment, and in brackets at the bottom, or your signature, and you will understand why as we go forward. This campaign is being supported by the Swiss Cancer League, and I'd like, because they are giving also this additional dimension to the campaign, I'd like to give the floor. He couldn't be here, unfortunately, to the chair of the Swiss Cancer League. His name is Gilbert Julien. And it's about a 4 and a half minutes video where he explains, and now that we have traveled in Colombia, in Europe, in a lot of places, now we are coming back to the Swiss issue, like Professor Cavalli started with.
On a besoin de faire en sorte que partout en Suisse, que ce soit dans les vallées, que ce soit dans les cités, que ce soit dans la plaine, lorsqu'une substance qu'on appellera médicament est jugée utile, elle soit accessible à tous. À l'intérieur même d'un traitement pour un patient, on a pu observer que tout à coup ce traitement lui était dénié. On vous paye 2 cycles de chimiothérapie, mais pas les autres. C'est impossible de faire comprendre aux citoyens pourquoi. C'est juste inacceptable en réalité, comme cas d'espèce. Alors bon, il n'y en a pas des milliers, on est d'accord, mais je dirais qu'un seul suffit à éveiller notre attention sur le fait que c'est une situation qui peut se reproduire et déboucher véritablement sur un système qui à ce moment-là sera au minimum à 2 vitesses, si ce n'est pas plus. Spécifiquement pour des questions de coût, je n'ai pas d'expérience personnelle qu'un patient n'a pas reçu le médicament à la fin. En revanche, il a dû, ce patient, faire appel à des aides extérieures pour avoir accès à ce médicament, sans qu'on lui ait dit « on ne vous le donne pas parce qu'il est trop cher ». Personne n'écrit ça. En revanche, nous, médecins, soignants, on peut avoir l'impression que le médicament n'a pas été pris en charge par l'assurance à cause de son prix. Le coût d'un médicament incite l'un ou l'autre médecin à ne pas le prescrire de peur qu'il ne soit pas pris en charge. J'ai envie de dire que jusqu'à présent, il a bien fonctionné. Très franchement, on a en Suisse un des meilleurs systèmes, si ce n'est le meilleur système sanitaire au monde, avec une juste répartition des coûts entre les différents acteurs. Et un système qui est supportable au plan de ce que le citoyen paye à travers ses cotisations obligatoires pour l'assurance maladie et puis ses cotisations obligatoires pour l'impôt. Maintenant, je reconnais que l'arrivée sur le marché de substances qui ne sont plus en milliers, ni même en dizaines de milliers de francs, mais en centaines de milliers de francs, met à mal cet équilibre. Et aujourd'hui, à mon avis, le peuple a commencé à crier, parce que les primes sont devenues insupportables. Moi, je cite régulièrement l'exemple malvenu, je le consens, des États-Unis, où la moitié des personnes qui souffrent de maladies cancéreuses et qui reçoivent des traitements anticancéreux finissent ruinées, meurent ruinées. Ce n'est pas notre style de vie, notre philosophie sociétale, elle n'est pas celle-là. Et il faut qu'on arrive à quelque chose. Autrement, on va dans le mur. Et plusieurs l'ont déjà dit. Donc on va devoir s'adapter de plus en plus à un vieillissement de population qui fait augmenter le nombre de maladies cancéreuses pour lesquelles on doit apporter une réponse soignante avec des médicaments quand ceux-ci sont à disposition. La Ligue suisse, elle a un réseau qui permet de montrer les besoins réels de la population auxquels les autorités se doivent de faire en sorte de pouvoir répondre. Le rôle de l'État, c'est de protéger les citoyens. Peut-être pas contre les tremblements de terre, ça n'y arrive pas, mais contre les effets néfastes que les maladies entraînent sur la société elle-même, en termes de perte d'années, ou même de perte de rôle et de fonction. C'est pour ça que le système suisse, il faut le préserver. Il faut réussir à garder cet esprit de partage qui est le nôtre. On est vraiment une communauté d'intérêt qui a envie de poursuivre l'aventure en partageant ses richesses. Fondamental, ça.
Ça y est. Il arrive, le geek de service. Okay, thanks. I think it gave you an idea of the situation seen from a perspective of an expert organization like the Swiss Cancer League. There's one of 8 videos that we are launching today of expert videos. 2 of them are among us. Professor Franco Cavalli is also does also have a video, and Madame Ruth-Dreyfus also, on these issues. So why this campaign in Switzerland? We are struggling with the price control mechanism, this has been said, and patent monopolies gives an extraordinary pricing power to the pharmaceutical industry. Cancer drugs, this has been said often, 100,000 or even more a year. Novartis has launched in the US cancer treatment rather than a drug at $500,000 for one use, one injection. So basically, the escalating prices is really leading or put a serious burden on the financial sustainability of health systems. Rationing already happened. This was mentioned with hepatitis C, and will only increase with this price hikes. There are legal solutions. We've discussed it. I won't talk about the instrument again. It's compulsory licensing. Just to say, the campaign is not to abolish the patent system. The campaign is to restore a broken balance. And that's the original idea of patents. Basically, public interest versus private interest. I just give you here an example that we have studied in particular, which is related to breast cancer drug Perjeta. And this is, I think, a good example of pricing power. In Switzerland, for a drug to be reimbursed, it has to be on the list. This is the list of specialties. It has been admitted in 2013, but then was withdrawn in 2014 due to disagreement over price. Basically, patients were taken hostage because of this disagreement between Roche and the Federal Office of Public Health. It was readmitted in 2015, but at an even higher price, whereas in the past it was considered uneconomical at the precedent price. So this is unbelievable, and this just shows the enormous pressure that lies on the Federal Office of Public Health and the pricing power. An annual cost of Perjeta is about 60,000 francs. If you combine it, as Professor Cavalli said, these are combined treatment, it's over 100 per patient. Roche has 3 out of 4 treatments for this specific category of breast cancer, which are the HER2 positive, for those who know it. But Herceptin is not a recent drug. They have been marketed since 1999, and they had over 70 billion revenue since launch. So when is it enough? And basically the main question is the price level of Perjeta really justified? The main objective of the campaign is to raise public awareness on the link between these patent monopolies and drug prices, to show also that universal health coverage is at stake, even in pharma land, if nothing is done. We want to have a public debate on a useful but largely unknown or even discredited legal tool to safeguard public health. These are compulsory licensing. And by considering such a tool, a government-use license, Switzerland would really send a strong signal, not only for domestic purposes, but also internationally. Switzerland is hosting a major health organization here, mainly in Geneva. So Switzerland has a special role and a special duty also in terms of sending signals towards the outside. Our demands will be that the Swiss government handle seriously against excessive drug prices, not through the existing drug price control mechanism, because this one is toothless. We need something else. To recognize, but fully recognize, the use of compulsory licensing where public interest dictates. We want them to stop pressure, Francisco has just said it, on sovereign countries using compulsory licensing for public health purposes. So there are 2 instances, Colombia, Thailand, a couple of years ago, where Switzerland became vocal and threatened of commercial issues if those countries would move forward. Switzerland should amend the Swiss health foreign policy. This is a document that's been adopted by the government, different departments, different ministries, but the part on compulsory licensing is referring to what Ellen just said, this sort of misleading information or restrictions. Basically, the Swiss say it's only in emergency situations, and this cannot be accepted anymore. This needs to change. And finally, the Swiss government should stop imposing what we call TRIPS plus provisions, basically asking for even more protection, even further patent protection, patent term extensions, data exclusivity, whatever, in their bilateral free trade agreements. And they are currently negotiating with India, which has an important role also as pharmacy of the poors, or even with Indonesia. These are our campaigning instruments. We will be releasing an expert report today. Maybe you've seen it in your material. We will launch a petition, which is called Appel Collectif French, Sammelbeschwerde in German. We'll have a dedicated campaign website and tools. We'll have these 8 videos I referred to, and we will have street actions. One is currently taking place as we speak in Zurich, with the key visual that I showed you before and that you see again here. I'll check again if it works. It doesn't. Otherwise, I'll do that afterwards. On the right-hand side, you can see the 8 videos. This will all be available online with all the material. Now I have a problem. But I think I was. Oh. Anyway, I was at the end of my presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. You can find also footage from our street action in Zurich, probably already online on the German page. And you have all the links in the press kit. So before opening the round of questions, I'd like to give the floor to former president of the Swiss Confederation, Madame Ruth Dreyfus, who also co-chaired the UN high-level panel on access to medicines. As such, you contributed to a very important landmark report which was published in 2016 on how to promote innovation and access to health technology. So maybe you can tell us a bit more on the recommendation related to our topic today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much and welcome to all of you, and thank you for the invitation here. Yes, I was very honored to have the opportunity to co-chair this report mandated by the Secretary General of the UN, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. And this is mainly on finding new balances between public health needs and the need for innovation, and to try to find also solution for what is neglected by the system of incentives we have now. Because we can discuss a long time about the necessity to keep or not to keep the patent system. It is working for a lot of disease. It has worked very well also for years, but it has also its failure, and the failures are clearly that they are not producing innovation for neglected disease. I call them also neglected patients, in the double sense that some diseases do not bring enough patients to make a return of investment very effective. Rare disease is a common word now. On the other side, that if the patients are too poor to pay for the medicine, there is no incentive to produce what they need. So this is really what is clear now for, I would say, 20 years, something like this. It was also discussed in the frame of WTO in relation with the international duties of the members of WTO to respect intellectual property rights, but immediately it was decided that a balance should be found between public health needs and the obligation to respect intellectual property rights. So the WHO mandated also another report. It was published in 2006 and it's perhaps a more analytical report, but with the same recommendation. And I must say, these recommendations are always timely, but they are not realized for a large proportion. So what I said before is really, this report is not a report against intellectual property, but it wants to put something very clear. For instance, in our mandate, it was asked to find a balance or to overcome incoherencies, this was the word chosen by the Secretary General, between the right of the inventor. Intellectual property is not the right of the inventor. Intellectual property is a contract, a social contract between an enterprise and the state, giving this, Ellen explained it very, very well, giving these rights of exclusivity under conditions. One of the conditions is the disclosure of the process that linked to the bring to the result, so that generica can enter as soon as the exclusivity has finished, can enter into the market because there is a publicly available recipe about how to produce something. Now, one of the problems that we always face is that there is a possibility to add something to invention, let's say now a medicine, so that you can prolong and prorogate the protection. And Glivec is a very good example of that. If I may, Dr. Rossi, just make a little comparison. It was just in the time we were working that Colombia tried to have a compulsory license. They had to renounce. They had to use it as a negotiation tool. They were successful in reducing the price, but they were not successful in declaring a compulsory license due to the pressure Dr. Rossi explained. And I think also because it's difficult to have a government being really coherent in this position. Generally, you have a health minister who wants a compulsory license and a trade minister who will be more reluctant. And this is a case we find in many, many countries. The same problem with Glivec was in India. And in that case, Switzerland was quite reluctant to threaten India because it's a big partner. And they didn't want to have a trade war with India. But having or threatening a trade war with Colombia, which is a little market, a poor country, and so on, was something that Switzerland could afford, to my shame. So if I speak about Glivec, it is because it's absolutely a case where the discussion is it a new medicine or not? And the Indian government and the Indian Supreme Court said it's not a new medicine, it's just the old medicine where something was added, adjuvant, salts. But the molecule, the active molecule, is the same that was protected with an earlier patent that was no longer valid. So this is just to explain how difficult the situation is if you try really to limit the exclusivity exactly to what is the new invention. Now, this was just a commentary also to this case, which is a very interesting case, also from the political point of view, but also from the innovation point of view of the pharmaceutical industry. Now, to be short, what are the conclusions of the high-level panel? I mean, the most important conclusion is what you heard from Ellen and others. It is the right of the states to decide what is the case in which a compulsory license can be decided. There is no international rule that can really make the government not able to say we are in a situation where we need this compulsory license. So it's not emergency only. It's not a situation where others can decide if it is legitimate to make a compulsory license. It is a sovereign right. And this is the reason why the campaign also for Switzerland is so important. So our call is a call to make the respect of this agreement, the Doha Agreement, and what is given as a balance between trade laws and intellectual property laws included in the trade laws and public health has to be used. These tools are in the hand of the government. And we are also, in this report, very bold, I would say, saying that the free trade agreements that are going beyond the rules of TRIPS and the Doha Declaration shouldn't be decided. Because these TRIPS Plus allow to have longer time of protection. They allow, for instance, in some cases, not to disclose the studies that were made in order, the clinical studies which are presented to receive an agreement and a price setting in the country. So respect the TRIPS and don't go to TRIPS Plus. Secondly, public financing of innovation is often neglected in the setting of the prices. You have public investment at the beginning in the fundamental research. You have also often, for instance, for rare disease, subsidies that are given by the states. And these are generally not taken into consideration by the price setting, which means, as one of the members of the Commission said, that often state pays twice. They pay for the innovation and they pay through the price to give more to the innovative industry. The very important point is transparency. And for me, as a former Minister of Health of this country, it is perhaps the most important. The emphasis we put on transparency is, I think, something new in the discussion. Because many things we heard today are, as I told, now 12 or 20 years old. But we have to call for transparency of the innovation process and the price setting by the industry. And I can just tell you, as a Minister of Health, I often had the impression that I was fighting with a hand attached behind my back, because in front of me I had people who had information about the cost of innovation, the cost of production, and so. And I was just in the dark trying to understand what was really the medicine worth. So these are the main recommendation, and I would just add a remark we put at the beginning of our report. We are always speaking about medicine, but medicine are just one element in the chain, in the therapeutic chain that is needed. We need vaccine, we need diagnostic, we need medicine, but we need also medical devices. And in all these, you find the same, and perhaps in a greater amplitude, the same problem of the price setting. I can tell you for medical devices, the benefits are greater, the intransparency of the system of innovation is greater. For diagnostic, we are now exactly in the same situation of having new diagnostics that are very, very expensive, and we have the problem to know how far they can be patented or not, because they are working with living elements. So we never should forget that we have to take into consideration the whole chain of biomedical answers to disease. And we brought one example, and I was very touched to meet the person that is quoted here. It is a person in South Africa. She was never tested for tuberculosis until the disease really was obvious, and she suffered, and her lungs suffered. She was not vaccinated. She was not tested. She became ill. She was treated only by the help of NGO. And she became, comment est-ce qu'on dit, sourde? Deaf by, as a consequences of her TB. So she needed also implant to be able to hear. So you see at this example, and this lady had no support from public entities, had no insurance, and so she was saved only by the charity. And this shows exactly the chain between vaccine, testing, diagnostic, treatment, and the medical devices you can need to have a normal life. So it is one conclusion, and the other conclusion, it was told before, is it's no longer a problem for the poor country, it's a global problem, but the poor country suffers more about the consequences of a failed system.
Thank you, all of you, for your presence, your presentation. Now it's time for questions. I propose we take 3 at a time. If you have a direct question for one of the experts, you can mention it. And we have about 20 minutes, I would say. Thank you.
I don't have a specific question, so am I able to put the mic on?
Mike.
I don't have a specific question. I just want to say I'm Salome Meyer from South Africa, Cancer Alliance. And I actually would like to say we would like to participate and with the Swiss, because we've launched very much a similar campaign in South Africa. And we hope that with this participation and joint work, we can actually then promote cancer access and cancer medicines in low middle income countries in Africa.
Thank you. Other remarks or questions? Yes. You have to press the button.
Just like that. Oh, I'm sorry. At the moment, pardon. Oh, pardon. Elisabeth Eckert, je représente rédaction Tamedia, 3 journaux, Tribune de Genève, 24 heures le matin, dimanche. I would like to know, now is the big assembly from HO. Tomorrow there will be 50th anniversary of the Association of Pharmaceutical Industry. What do they answer when you say to your campaign? You're not the first to present that. It's great what you make, but you're not the. What did they answer now? Please, everybody.
I can't say because we just launched it, so I don't know about their reactions. But what I can guess from previous campaigns and from all the debate about public health and intellectual property, what they will try to say, it's a campaign against patents. It is ruining innovation. We need to move abroad if it continues like that, and basically compulsory licensing is should be used only in exceptional terms, and that goes back with what Helen said. But it remains to be seen, because I don't know how they would react to that.
But that's usually reaction.
Well, just a comment, because well, this is information which has not circulated a lot, but it's known in the field that in January, a few countries tried to convince the board of the WHO to discuss that more openly at the General Assembly concerning the two most important points. The first, which is very important, what Ruth said, to oblige a pharmaceutical company to be transparent in the cost, because they say that they spent billions to bring drugs to the market, which is not true, and all the studies which have been carried out show that it is roughly 1/10 of that, no? But nobody knows exactly, and so it's very important. And the second request was to discuss openly the problem of compulsory licensing and so on. And the most important Western country, well, at the end, they were able to more or less block that, or to water down that. So that's it's very difficult there, because like in all the UN organisms, I mean, some of the big powers can blockade everything for a long period of time.
Because I had the opportunity in previous time, and also through the two commission I chaired and co-chaired, to listen a lot of the argument of the pharmaceutical industry. I would say the pharmaceutical industry, on one side, thinks that the system is the best system to promote innovation, okay? But the other argument is that they are doing what they should do to help poor countries with two tools. One is differentiated prices. That means that they and some Swiss industry did a lot in this case. I mean, Roche mainly have a system, a more or less a clear system of prices that are not the same in different countries and different settings. But this is often not a real solution, because in countries where the patient has to pay out of the pocket, even a low price is not affordable. So taking into account the level of the, national, how do you, comment est-ce qu'on dit, le produit national brut, the GDP, even in countries where Roche is ready to take the GDP as a criteria, you have very poor population that are not able to access to the medicine because they are not affordable. And the second argument is that they give some compassionate medicine if it is needed. For instance, in India, the argument they used to say that it was unfair to attack Novartis on the patent on Glivec was that they were giving Glivec to some people in India without paying at the end. But I mean, these are not sustainable solutions. Well, I mean, differentiating prices may be, and it's also one of the proposals we do, but compassionate treatment are not a sustainable solution. So yes, I mean, the pharmaceutical industry is a strange industry, because on one side it's clear that it can be innovative. It is always sure, I mean, it is the industry that has the best conscience, la meilleure conscience. Because they always say, and I just read, for instance, an article where they say, the article on Novartis and the contract they have with Mr. Cohen Industry. And if you read the letter of the CEO, it is beautiful. I mean, the problem will be solved, but our medicine will last for the future of humanity, I mean, and be the solution for everything. So they have a very good conscience, and from time to time, I think we should show that they are doing good things, but they are also neglecting many, many patients.
Well, I would like to add, just to conclude that, perhaps, a personal experience, just with the tools which were now summarized by Ruth. I'm personally involved in developing cancer treatment and cancer diagnostic in Nicaragua, in El Salvador, and in Kyrgyzstan. And we have helped all the three countries to be able to diagnose the CRB2 in women with breast cancer, which is for 20% of them. And there is one drug from Roche, trastuzumab, which is absolutely necessary for them. But no one patient there can get that free of charge. Only patients who can pay out of the pocket, which is a bit less than here, but is still in the order of thousands of francs. So almost nobody can afford that without ruining the family, selling the house, and so on. So no one patient is getting that free of charge in these three countries. I don't know what they are doing in the rest, but I know exactly, because I am involved there, that there is no solution there which has been offered to the patients. Although we have helped the country to develop the diagnostic possibilities to know the 20% of the women who really need that drug.
Thank you. I think there's a question up front.
My name is Nicola Magrini. I'm the secretary of the Essential Medicine List. I'm great pleasure in hearing all this. And I would like just to add a comment. One is commenting Madame Dreyfus on diagnostics, that, as you saw, also New York Times today is quoting the new Essential Diagnostic List from WHO, responding to a request that goes back 20 years and was actually stopped for political reason 20 years ago. So there are signs of changes over time. And to expand on the issue on transparency and more symmetrical access to available knowledge, I would like to attract your attention on the fact that there is growing interest on access to cancer medicine. There is a resolution going on this week at the World Health Assembly. And we have been charged, and Professor Cavalli is charged of the working group that should release a document during the summer or before the summer on magnitude of benefit of cancer medicines. And I think more knowledge on the fact that only a tiny proportion, probably 10% or 20%, I would say 10, of the many cancer medicines approved in the last 15 years, more than 100, probably less than 10, a good candidate for the Essential Medicine List. I think this should be another platform to share, to think how to give new solution to an old problem. Let me just add, for example, that what we did for hepatitis C was the exact contrary. We listed all new hepatitis C medicines to have more competition there, whereas for cancer medicine, probably we need different approach, as it is much more complex. Thank you.
I would like to make a comment on the role of the WHO in this, and having essential medicines lists or having essential diagnostic tools or essential medical equipment lists, I think is very, very important, because it actually signals very clearly that the products that are on those lists, they're essential for a reason. It means that they have to be made available. So price alone cannot be a grounds for withholding it, and that speaks to the responsibility of the state. Of course, we can ask nicely, would you please lower the price of your products? And in some territories, companies may do that, but we're not, with that approach, we're not getting the price that truly meets the definition of as an essential medicine, that it has to be affordable to the community and to the people in question. the argument in any discussion, whether it is about Switzerland or whether it is about the need to lower prices on the essential medicines list, that if you take that approach, you will negatively affect innovation. We will always hear, and I think we have to start immunizing our politicians against that argument, because it paralyzes a better informed policy debate. This is also why we need to have, because there is an atmosphere of anxiety in this field by policymakers. Oh dear, we don't dare to touch it because the whole world will come crashing down. But we actually lack the essential elements to have a much better informed a policy debate there, where we have those elements in the form of greater transparency, data and knowledge about what innovation actually costs. It is incredibly revealing. I also find it revealing that the pharmaceutical industry here this week is quite active in putting out negative messages about this call for greater transparency. I find that actually surprising, because it is really the key to advancing things. Of course, by way of background, we have to keep in mind that while we're talking about, for many populations, a failed system, from an industrial point of view, this system is highly successful. The pharmaceutical industry is an incredibly profitable industry, and the companies will defend that, and so will their shareholders. And that is where a large part of the problem lies. And without greater transparency, better knowledge about what does it cost to develop new products, how are prices set, how do companies arrive at the decision to set prices in various markets, and greater transparency with regard to prices, it's going to be very difficult to break through this.
Thank you, Hélène. Time is running by. I think we'll take one last question, if you agree, and then our experts will...
My name is Madhur Sach for Essential Medicines. And I appreciate we are talking about transparency in R&D, but I'm curious, when we talk about transparency, how much transparency is considered to be exactly transparent? Like, in other words, how much detail-oriented we are at the basic level of innovation, at where like data is being generated. And also, is there a way where WHO or any governing body can verify any innovation by reproducing that data? So I'm just curious if you can. Thank you.
There are various levels of transparency, and various issues that would benefit from greater transparency. You refer to the clinical trial data, for example. The ability to assess what we're getting actually better than what we have is incredibly important. You can only do that if you have full disclosure of the science behind it. Greater transparency with regard to the cost. There we have it. It begins to emerge because in academia there's more work in this field. But of course, the pharmaceutical industry could disclose that. You could make that part of the conversation. If you want a certain price, why don't you tell us how you arrive at that price? If I take the case of Europe, for example, where we grant, or we, our patent offices rather, grant patent extensions of up to 5 years. They're called supplementary protection certificates after the 20-year patent protection has run out, based on the premise that 20 years is not sufficient. Now, I would say, let's turn that around and let's say, disclose that 20 year has not been sufficient. In that case, it would perhaps be fair to give a little bit more, because if you haven't been able to recoup your investment in that 20 years, then perhaps you should have some more. But it is given based on an assumption. It's almost a belief system rather than an evidence-based system. Now, I could go on and on because there are many other areas where greater transparency is necessary, but these are just some of the examples, and I think would help clarify.
There are very different levels of transparency, from the cost of innovation, where you have also to take into consideration the failure of the system. I mean, it's not just the studies for one or the research for one medicine, but you have to know how it is structured. But you have also to know what is really the cost of innovation and what is perhaps only cost of marketing. There is a suspicion that the cost of marketing is higher than the cost of innovation in the pharmaceutical industry. So, I mean, we have to know how these costs are. And we have the level of the price. And it is interesting to know that for some differential prices, the contract is, or for some retrocession, comment est-ce qu'on dit, des réductions de prix? Discount, for some discount, you receive a discount, but you don't have to speak about the discount. Because the comparison between the different levels of prices are arguments that might bring some countries to be more, to demand more discount for themselves. So WHO has a role to play, and they try to make it more transparent from the system of the pricing between different countries. I think this is very important. There is also the transparency of the patents themselves, because the patents are a very complex system. For one medicine, you can have 100 patents, perhaps. So bringing WIPO also to have a better transparency of the system of patents to allow the people or the generic industry to know exactly when is the patent finished, what can I do at this moment, and so is also very important. And we had also witnessed situation where the entry of generic was delayed because of this lack of transparency. So there are different levels, different actors, different stakeholders that are called for action when we speak about transparency.
Thank you. I think this sorry, we've covered a lot of ground, probably more than we thought, but it was great. Thank you for your presence. Our experts are available now for interviews, and you can find all relevant document, reports, campaigning on our website. Thank you.